the most epic win I've ever seen. I'm white, he's black, he's a legit grandmaster. And so far I'm undefeated. But so here's how this plays out. He had me in guaranteed checkmate in 33 moves, but when I put him in check, instead of doing what he was supposed to do, he actually did quite the opposite. But anyways, it doesn't really matter. Like, he moved his king up. If he would have moved his king back, I couldn't have forced a second check, and he would have been fine. Anyways, it doesn't matter.
Honest something.
Anyways.
Scott, aka Metallica's lead, put on Facebook.
Sure. Anyways, so I move my rook, and he counters by moving his bishop over here to take my rook. So basically, this rook's insecure at the minute, and I counter that just by taking his rook and allowing my rook to be sacrificed. He takes my rook. I move my rook over to take his bishop. His bishop retreats back to its original spot. I move my rook over, hoping that he'll take it, and he does. He sacrifices his rook for my rook. I take it with my bishop. Shit, go back. He moves his knight up to b7. I counter, and I put my bishop up to f4. Just trying to get in there because I'm planning a queen, because I want to trick him into thinking I'm attempting to get a queen back, but I am really in reality trying to get a queen back, but not in the same fashion. So he moves his knight out to c5, and I take my bishop all the way up to b8, and so now he moves his knight out, and so I take it with my king. It's obvious he's trying to force some sort of mate. And so he puts me in check, and all I do is I move up behind my pawn at e4, and at e5 he can't move his bishop over to counter that. He moves me to moves to f5, puts me in check. I move over to f4, assuming that he's going to bring this pawn down right here. He doesn't. He actually brings his bishop. He brings his bishop to h6, puts me in check, and I move in between his pawn and my pawn, so I'm pretty secure at the minute. He comes down behind here, and I'm like, I'm willing to sacrifice a pawn here. He moves to f1. I move to e6. I'm secure. He moves and attempted to take my knight after taking my pawn. I move my knight because I need my knight. He moves his bishop up right here. I start moving my pawn up, and then he moves his bishop again. So I can literally not move my king except in another position. That doesn't really matter. But I take his pawn at a7, and then he moves to d8, blocking off this pawn right here, so I can't get it. So I just move it up anyways, because he's going to move the bishop eventually. He moves his king to g7 so that he has just more area to move in case he gets put in check, because that's a big possibility. Plus, if I get my queen back, he's in trouble. I move to c4 with my knight. He moves to d3 to counter my knight, but I was doing that just to take his pawn. I take his pawn. He moves his king back up. I started advancing this pawn. I'm not sure if he really noticed it. He moves it. Yeah, he did. That's right. He moved his bishop, and I just moved up a spot. Just a big fuck. Screw you. He moves his pawn down. I move my bishop up to b8. He moves his king over back to g8. I move my king to d6. He moves his bishop to d3. I move my bishop to b7, c7, hoping that he takes it, because it doesn't really matter at that point. Instead he retreats. I get a queen, which he's going to take. He'll gladly sacrifice his bishop for a queen, especially since he's in check. He's in check, takes my queen, I take his bishop. He's now down to bishop and 3 pawns, and I'm sitting at bishop, knight, and 3 pawns as well. So he moves to h6, and I move to d7. He moves his bishop to e2. I move to b8, just to cover up some more coverage in case, because it's a white square, in case he wants to screw with my pawn anymore. Which is whatever. So I start slowly advancing my pawn, and he moves his bishop to a8, covering that square. And at which point I just move my knight over. He moves his king to f7. And then I move my knight so that he's in deep shit. He goes all the way to f3. I move my knight over again. so that he's forced to take my knight. Instead, he just tries to make it so that he's going to take my bishop. That's not going to happen. I go to b6. He goes to f7. I advance to a7. He takes my knight. I take it with my king. He moves his king up, and I get my queen. And he moves over there. I go to d8, put him in check, and this is where the really long checkmate starts. So he does that. He moves his queen up to He moves his king up to g4. I move to d7 and get him in check again. He moves to f3. I move to h3 and get check again. It didn't really matter. I take his pawn at h6. He moves to e1. I move over to g6, taking his other pawn. He moves it back to e2. I start advancing this pawn to get another queen, and he just does kitty corner. And then I get both my queens. I put him in check. I don't put him in check at d3. I just hold him there. So he moves his pawn, and I move my queen over to a1, putting him in checkmate. That was a legit game. It was over a 70-move game, and this is just the second half after I was secure, and that's where I downloaded the PGN. That's absolute win. Anyways, thought you guys might enjoy that.